This week, in addition to being Parshas Mishpatim, it's also Shabbos Parshas Shkolim, where we take out an extra Sefer Torah for those communities that have enough Sefer Torahs, and we read an extra parsha in the Torah from Parshas Kisisa about that the counting of Bnei Yisrael took place with the half a shekel, and through every person giving a half a shekel, that's how they counted up how many half shekels were. They knew the number of the Bnei Yisrael. And Chassidus, the Rebbe's Maimer, has a lot of questions about both the language that's used concerning this and other aspects of this issue. So we'll begin. It's a Maimer from Tafshin Lamed Hey. Sisas Rosh Bnei Yisrael Gomer, when you will count the heads of the Bnei Yisrael, and every person will give an atonement for the soul. This is what they will give whoever passes by upon the count. Machzah shekel gomer, half a shekel, etc. Esrim geira hashekel v'gomer, 20 geiros. There was a geira coin. 20 of them made up a shekel. So therefore, half of that was 10 gera each. Now, there is going to be a few questions having to do with language, that the language that they're using over here, and there could have been other terms and language that could be used for counting and numbers, and even other words that have in it like a pun that can be understood on many levels, and these words that can be understood on different levels comes to explain something more than just counting the. So he says in line 4, it's known, the analysis of this in the Mamar Mavarabei Marnasim, skip the parentheses, Mahu Oimbroi Kisisa, why does it say Kisisa? The simple meaning, what is this pasuk talking about? It's talking about counting and calculation. So he's saying when you count the heads of the Bnei Yisrael. So the Rebbe is going to ask why use specifically this, if you will, unusual choice of word for counting. Instead, he could have used a word that's more commonly used for counting, like tifkoid. Tifkoid is actually related to what we say further on, kala oiver ala pikudim. It's the same word, it's the same root word. So he should have begun that way. Ki tifkoid as roit b'nei Yisrael, or ki tifkoid as b'nei Yisrael. Or there's other languages and other words used in Lashon Kodesh for counting. Why specifically? Why is it used the expression tisa? Because tisa also has the meaning shemoira gam al hagba v'isnasus. It also shows I'm being raised up and elevated. And using the word tisa alone, using the word tisa, which already has another connotation of elevation, loirak tisa stam. He doesn't just say ki tisa es b'nei Yisrael, which would have a connotation also of raising the b'nei Yisrael, but shekoilol gam hagbos harosh yachidim kol haguf. If it would say just tisa, then it would include raising of the head together with the entire body. El kitisa es roish dafke. It says specifically you will be counting the head specifically. Why specifically does he talk about the head as if the head is what's being raised more so than any other part of the body? That's one question. Another question is that there's an idea of atonement over here that's not explained. What is the atonement for? It says in line 13, also we need to understand what it says. Every person will give an atonement for a soul. What sin is there over here that there has to be an atonement for it? It's not the story of Machzah Shekel is not written in connection in Torah Shabbat in the Chumash, with any type of Avera that you would think that the half a shekel is a matter of an atonement. Rather, as we're about to explain, it's just a practical thing of how they would be able to count, since you're not allowed to count Yidden by number. He says in line 16, like he adds the Maimer of the year 1910, that was recently reprinted in Tafshin Lamed Hey, Ashalpi Apashatu. The simple reason why it was the whole idea of giving a half a shekel was it wasn't like some type of kapara. It was because you're not supposed to count Jewish people directly. So instead, they would give a half a shekel each, and through each one giving a half a shekel, that's how they would count the Yidden. But that's not the only thing the pasuk says. By saying the term atonement, it indicates that this is for an atonement for a sin. And he continues in that theme because it continues also in the pasuk which Messiah concludes lechaper al nafsheseichem, to atone for your souls. Seemingly, what type of sin is there over here? Now he's going to add, even if there is an atonement to be had for whatever reason, but the term nefesh and atonement don't fit together according to Pnimis HaTorah, according to the Zohar. So he says, Moisif, line 20, he adds, moving even more, so it's not understood, Mashakosov, Koifer Nafshoi, that's the atonement of his soul, nefesh daika, specifically, not like an atonement for a person, an atonement for the Jewish people. It says specifically an atonement for the soul. The benefesh vade and shaya chet v'avim shalom. When you talk about the soul, for sure, the idea of a sin doesn't apply. Heaven forbid. Like it says in the Zohar, on the pasuk in Chumash Vayikra. In Chumash Vayikra it says v'nefesh kisechta, when a soul that sins. So the Zohar says tava. It's a wonder. You cannot read v'nefesh kisechta as a statement. It's a question mark at the end. It's not an exclamation point. You cannot believe that a person, a Jewish person, could sin. So therefore, in a similar vein over here, why does it say the term nefesh when it refers to the koifer, even if we're talking about some type of atonement for sin? So why does it say that each person will give a koifer for his nefesh, for his soul? Now the Rebbe adds to what the Rebbe Rashab said in his Mamorim. The question is, we can add to this, to preface Mashakasu, where it says, Kol ha'over ala pikudim, where it says, whoever passes by upon the count. Now you remember we said before we were going to play around a little bit with some puns, which is very common and also a lot of times Chassidus. The simple meaning in this is that's referring to the count of the number that passed by before Moshe to be counted. That's why it says whoever passes by on the count. But the Mamorim, it's brought down the explanation. The word pikudim is related to a lack, a deficiency, something that's missing, something that's absent. That's in the meaning of the word pikudim. Like it says, Vayipakid Mekayim David, when it tells the story about David and Yonasan, and David was unsure if Shaul wanted to kill him or not, and he was a Ben Bayis, he was a member of the household of Shaul HaMelech, used to come for occasions over there, and then he absented himself from a Rish Chodesh meal, and it says, Vayipakid Mekayim David, the place that was set aside for David was empty. So we see that Vayipakid means for the word empty. So Kol ha'over pikudim means that there's something lacking and deficient. And another thing that we find that it's where the deficiency is, va'ad l'pirish Chazal, until the explanation of the Chazal. Shekol ha'over al pikudim, here he says, over is not just pass, but cross, like Aveira. So it says in the Zohar, Koi alman da over al pikudim daraisa. It's referring to someone that transgresses the commands of the Torah. So here he's playing even more games with the words. Over from the word Aveira. Pikudim is from the word pikuda, command, the commandments. He transgresses the commandments is something that's brought down in different Mamari Chazal. Va'ad l'cheta egel, until even the sin of the golden calf. V'zel sheparshas Shkolim namra acher cheta egel. The Mefarshim on Chumash, including Rashi, says that even though in the Torah, the Parshas Kisisa, the beginning of it talks about the machzah shekel, the half a shekel, and the sin of the golden calf is something that took place in the middle of Parshas Kisisa, but in truth, the Yidden were commanded to give a half a shekel after the sin of the golden calf, and the Mefarshim Mikner say this is the lechaper al nafshei seichem, this is the atonement for the sin of the golden calf. So here we find a whole bunch of things about how the count, the word pikudim is in the word lacking. Overall pikudim means someone transgresses the Torah, the pikudim, the mitzvahs. Specifically, it's a severe sin like the cheta egel. So he says in line 10, Shu hepech klos ha-Torah, it's the opposite of the Torah in general. It's not just one individual Aveira, but it's a general Aveira, Kimavur, Betanya, like explained in Tanya, Shemitzvahs v'azharas avodah zarah, both the command to believe in Hashem and the warning against serving idols, Shem Shnei Dibros HaRishonim Anoich V'Layiyelecha. These are the two first Dibros, the two first commandments of the 10 Commandments of I am your God, and you shall not have any other gods before you. Hem Klolus Kol HaTorah Kula. This includes the entire Torah, these first two Dibros. Ki Dibur Anoichi Kol Kol Ramach Mitzvahs Aseh, because the first of the 10 Commandments of Anoichi Hashem Elokecha includes in it all the 248 positive commandments. And you shall not have any others, any other gods before you, includes all the 365 negative commandments. So it comes out that when the Yidden transgressed the sin of the golden calf, it was not just one of the sins or a major sin, it was something that's like a transgression against the entire Torah. So now we are introducing that all of these terms and hints and Mamar Chazal are pointing to negative situations over here. They transgress the mitzvahs, the Torah, to the severest one of the Egel. And yet, if so, it says in line 15, according to this, it's even more difficult. What he says, kisisa, that shows on not being upraised and elevated, because when we're found in a state of being upraised and elevated, it's not possible there should be an idea of a sin that demands atonement. So therefore, based on all that we just now said, that the hints in the words, etc., of l'kaper al nafshei seichem, etc., that there was something negative going on, how does it fit in with the positive of raising up? B'yoser yukshin, even more difficult. The indication of the words is when you will raise up the heads of the Bnei Yisrael, Shuin Hagbal, like we said before, it's the idea of elevation. Specifically then, they will give an atonement for their soul. Beforehand, there was like, as if it wasn't necessary to deal with an atonement for the soul. Now, when you raise them up, there's a necessity for an atonement for their souls. How does that make sense? If they're raised up, so there's no negative things, there's no transgressions, etc., that need to have atonement. So he says in Ois Beis, line 23, V'yuvim behegdim klose in the machzah shekel is be understood by prefacing the general idea of the half a shekel, shenemar la'achrei hagdama de tisas roish, that the general idea of the half a shekel was said following the words kisisas roish, that you will raise up the heads. Ze yitnu goimer, it says this is what they shall give, machzas a shekel goimer, a half a shekel, etc. Esrim geira a shekel, 20 geiras is a shekel. Kadir ba'adrushim, like the analysis in the Mamorim Shalachura in a move on, seemingly it's not understood. Madu Allah namash tzarich litin eser geira. Why doesn't it just get straight to the point and say give a 10 geira? No, it doesn't say that. It says give a half a shekel, and a shekel is 20 geira, so therefore a half a shekel is 10 geira. Just say give 10 geira. That's explained concerning this. The general service of a person to Hashem. There's the portion that the person does on his own, as an inspiration from below. And then there's the portion that comes down through his avodah on his own, that comes as a result of his avodah on his own. It comes down from above, in a way of an inspiration from above. Like it's brought down in what's called the siddur with dach. There's a fat siddur that has mamorim that the Mittler Rebbe transcribed from the Alter Rebbe. So it's brought down over there in the note on the siddur on Tikkun Chatzos. Concerning the perfection and completion of love and awe of Hashem that comes from above. But when does a person get that great love from above, get to be at that great level of love for Hashem from above? Through prefacing it and doing his own service and working on his love from below and his awe from below, and then Hashem comes and fills in whatever needs more to be done to have a love and awe from above. That's also the point of saying a half a shekel and eser geira. He doesn't just say a half a shekel, he says eser geira is a half a shekel, will be 10 geira. The service and the work of a person in serving Hashem in all of his 10 soul powers, which is what brings him to love and awe of Hashem through his intellect and his emotions, which is the 10 soul powers are corresponding to the Eser Geira, to the 10 Geira coins. He has to know that Eina Ella Machzis Bolvad, these are only a half. And through that, his investment of his half, of his 10 soul powers, so then he receives from above the half from above. Then only becomes the holy shekel, that a holy shekel has in it all 20 geira. This idea is not that the 20, that the half that comes from above is not something, a separate thing, he gets a half from above, but rather, it becomes joined with the half that came about through the person's initial service, that he brought a half to the table, and now it affects the second half that came down from above and joined with the half that the person brought to the table. It influences all the specific and detailed matters of the service of a person. Both in his internal soul powers, which are usually the 10 koiches of the soul, and also his transcendent and encompassing soul powers, which usually involve will and delight, Nasim ba'ofen shel hagba v'isnasu. So now what he did before, what he did independently on his own, by having the half come down from above, now this is elevated as well. This arises to a higher level as well. That's the idea that you will raise up the head. It sensed in them that they are as a result of what's coming from above. Similar to what's explained in the Mimer with that title, which is actually a pasuk in this week's Parsha Mishpatim. So in that Mimer of the Alter Rebbe, it's explained that a person needs to focus and know faithfully that all his love and awe that comes down to him, it's a gift of Hashem that it gives him the power to make grow the love of Hashem and his awe upon his face. It doesn't come out of the person's own power himself. That's why it's idea of kisisas roish, that the person feels and is elevated by it and feels this is his godly. It's a godly event. Ois Gimel, line 24. Valpize Yuvan Mashakosov Kala Oiver al Pikudim. Now we will also understand how is it possible when you're talking about Kisisas Roish, talking about such a high level, and over here you're talking about Pikudim, that Pikudim is in the word, like it says, Vayipokid Mekom David, something's lacking. How can you say that there's something lacking if a person is found in a state and situation of being raised up? Like we asked that question in the first ois of the Maimer. So the Rebbe is going to say two explanations. There's going to be a slight difference between them. So just pay attention over here to these two different explanations, even though they seem a bit similar. So he says, in addition to the fact that you could explain, that the intention over here is to say that we're not talking about a severe deficiency. We're talking about a very subtle lack. So our question initially was that how could it be if the person is upraised and elevated, that should be pekudim, that should be a matter that he's missing and he's lacking something. So the Rebbe is going to say, and he's going to elaborate a little bit more in the next few lines, we're not talking about a major transgression. We're talking about that despite him being in a very elevated state, but he still didn't completely atone or wipe away or remove some type of impression, some type of subtle leftover, if you will, or some type of subtle level of something that needs to be fixed up. And the Rebbe says it's similar to the idea of kapara. Let me first go back in what the Rebbe is soon going to quote from Tanya. The Rebbe explains in Tanya, in the Geras HaTshuva, two meanings in the word kapara. One meaning in the word kapara is atonement. Atonement means a person did chas v'sholom something wrong, so they need to atone for their sin, they need to ask forgiveness, they need to do tshuva to get rid of any negative effects of the sin, to get rid of any chas v'sholom, any punishments that could be. That's one meaning and one level in the term kapara. There's a deeper and higher and more refined meaning of kapara, means to totally wipe away any type of negative of the sin, to totally polish themselves so that they are as beloved by Hashem as they were before. So the Rebbe is going to say that in our pasuk, when it talks about l'chaper al nafshei seichem and kaifer nafshei, we're not talking about the lower level of kapara. We're talking about dealing with sins that need to be removed, so not to be punished for, but we're talking about the more subtle type of form, to be in a most favored state like he was before he did wrong. So that's what you're saying, the brackets, line 29, 2 lines in the bottom of the page. In a similar vein, we could explain concerning what it says to atone for your souls. We're not talking about atonement and forgiveness of sin. In such a manner that the Alter Rebbe says over there in the Ger Tshuva that he's done such a type of tshuva that when it comes judgment, they're not going to mention the matter, half a matter, not going to mention anything about it. It's not going to be brought up. But that's only the lower level of kapara. There's a higher and deeper meaning and more subtle form of kapara. Ela kavona hishi yield l'rotzon fnei Hashem umerut v'chavi v'cholu. That the intention is to be accepted by Hashem and beloved, just as he was before the sin. Kimivor b'geras hatshuva, like explained the geras hatshuva. That is step one of explaining how kapara fits in over here, how pikudim, which means deficiency and lack, fits in if he's in such an elevated state. In this explanation, it means despite his elevated state, despite it was kisisa es roish, despite him having his half of his avodah, of his love and awe of Hashem, brought down the love and awe from above and influenced his love and awe, etc., etc. Despite that, there could still be some subtleties, some impurities that still need to be cleansed, that's still lacking and deficient. That is the first way how the Rebbe explains. The main way how the Rebbe wants to explain it is not that it's despite his high level, but specifically because of his higher level. Let's see in line 4. Yesh loymar, after the brackets, the Rebbe says, we could say, Shakavona hi l'chisoren shenasa davke mitzad ha'inyan ha'agba v'aisnasta tisas roish. This is a lack and deficiency that comes about specifically as a result of his being raised up high and his elevation, that his head was raised up, like we said before, because his half joined with Hashem's half and so on. What does that mean? How is it that raising himself up to such a high level it causes that it should be considered that he's lacking and deficient? So he says, in the Al-Derech HaMavur Ba'adrushim, similar to what's explained in Mamar, the reason that specifically in Shmeina Esra and the Amidah we say forgive us, slach lanu. We have a bracha, slach lanu. Seemingly, we've been going through so many different levels in davening. Slach lanu, forgiveness should be asked before all of this. We've been going higher and higher. Chassidus explains that the davening is a whole ladder. The four rungs on the ladder. There's Psukei de Zimra and the brachas of Krishma, and there's Krishma, and there's Shemoneh Esrei is the highest rung on the ladder. Over there, we're asking for Hashem's forgiveness. How does that make sense? And in a similar vein, the Rebbe adds in the parentheses, and similarly, what we say of Shamnu Bagadnu after Shemoneh Esrei specifically. How does that fit in? How after you're reaching the pinnacle, the greatest heights, the top of the ladder, the apex in Shemoneh Esrei, over there you're asking after Shemoneh Esrei, you're saying Hashem the Bagadnu, etc., etc. So the Mamorim explains Shadavke Mitzadakir of Lalakus, Shaidei Haizbonus to Krish Machul, specifically because of the closeness to godliness that comes about through the meditation and contemplation of reading the Shema. Azai Margishu Choite. Then he senses that he is a sinner, not a sinner in the simple sense. He's just lacking in a very subtle way to what he could be at. Like someone, like we said before, that Oivra al Pikudim is he's transgressing on the commandments, but he feels that way, not because he's actually transgressed, but because he's in such an elevated state that every small thing seems terrible. Just to give a very simple analogy, when you're wearing ordinary weekday clothes, you have a tiny spot on it. It's not noticeable. It's not something that we care about. But if a person's wearing a wedding dress and there's a tiny little dot and a speck on the bottom of the dress, it's it's a tragedy. It has to be taken care of, because the more elevated the situation is, then even the most minor thing is considered of importance. And he's going to give an example from line 12. He says, like, for example, someone that's standing in front of the king, shagam tnua kala, even a minor movement, that the Gemara uses the term machve b'moche kamamalkachulu. He's making a circle in the air, he's trying to signal to someone in front of the king. Kemered yechoshev, it's considered as severe as rebelling against the king. Obviously, when he's not in the king's presence, there's no problem about making the slight movement of his hand in the air. But in front of the king, things that are minor have a greater significance. So therefore, being that it's kisisas roish, that very being raised up to a higher level because of the machzis of below is joined with the machzis from above, is something that makes the person feel pikudim, that he's lacking. Because of this comes about by him a state and situation of feeling that he's lacking, that the place of David is now missing from the word pikudma, we said before, that it's lacking, it's empty. So the Rebbe now adds another thing. Chassidus says there's a very interesting thing that we find that the word pikudim again contains in it. And in the same sentence we find this. In that discussion over there between David and Yonasan, it says over there, "V'nifkadeta ki poked Moshevecha." It says David HaMelech will be remembered because your seat will be empty. In other words, they'll bring up at a table, where's David? His seat is empty. So emptiness shows on a lack. V'nifkadeta shows on a presence. And the same word is used for both. The same root word. V'nifkadeta ki poked Moshevecha. So the Rebbe says the same thing over here. When a person is in a state of pikudim, that they are elevated, kisisas roish, through the level of the feeling they are half and being connected to the half from above. So then they are feeling that they are lacking. So that very state of feeling that they are lacking, that itself brings that the person should be in the state where he is remembered above, where he has a greater connection. That's what he says in line 16. Through this, that through the fact that you will be remembered, because your seat will be empty. The bittul, the sublimation that the person has, is similar to the statement of Rab Shimon Bar Yochai that he said, "Ano Simona ba'alma." Rab Shimon Bar Yochai said, I am nothing. I'm just a sign indicating on Hashem. Just like a signpost is nothing of its own. Its entire being is just to point at the important thing. The same thing Rab Shimon Bar Yochai said, that he's completely of no consequence. That's similar to the pikudim, that he feels himself lacking. I'm nothing of my own. And then the Rebbe has an amazing thing here in the brackets. You do all like it's known. Once Reb Shimon Bar Yochai opened the way for this and said this type of bittul about himself, this becomes applicable to every single yid, from the heads until your water carriers. And through having this bittul, through sensing and feeling oneself in such a state that they are completely of no consequence and only a sign and so on, that itself causes that nishlam achisaron, that the lack and the deficiency becomes now filled and fixed up. Line 22. We can add to this even more in depth. That what it says that he crosses over the pikudim is in the positive. Beforehand we said he crosses, meaning he's over, he did an avera on the commands of Hashem. So here he's saying over means cross and going beyond. That over al pikudim means lamayla mipikudei araisa. He goes beyond and above the mitzvahs of the Torah. Ki yadua be'inyan she Yisrael nikroim chasn v'Torah nikras kala. We know that the Jewish people are called a chasn and the Torah is called a bride. Moshe says Torah tzivalanu Moshe my Rasha. Torah that Moshe commanded us is a Mayrasha, is an inheritance. So the Chazal say about this, Al tikra Mayrasha ela me'oirasa. Do not read it as Mayrasha, but Mayrasa, married, betrothed. Meaning that just like the Chasn is mashpia to the Kala, so too that the Yidden and the Torah are betrothed, and they are the Chasn, and the Torah is the Kala. She Yisrael mashpiim umamshichim oiren sof b'Torah. That the Yidden influence and draw down the infinite light of Hashem in the Torah. Shezeu inyan baruch b'Torah tchila. That's the idea that we say they make a bracha on the Torah initially before studying Torah. What's the idea of a bracha on the Torah study? Because bracha is from the word hamshacha, like we have many times in Chassidus, that the job of the Yidden is to draw down godliness into the Torah more than the Torah itself has. And there's another thing that's brought down in Kabbalah, like David Mechaber, Torah Shalamayla Bakadosh Baruch Hu, like Torah, like it says that David HaMelech joined the Torah of above with Hashem. So we see the same idea brought down in other places, that Yidden have the power to add and connect the Torah with Hashem in a way that the Torah doesn't have on its own. By days, through what Yidden do and add to the Torah through their Torah study, Nasa Inyan the Nesinas HaTorah Mechodesh, comes about the idea of Matan Torah anew, that the Torah is always every single day new. The Rebbe explains in the Mamarim, because of what we are adding to the Torah. So therefore, it's like the Torah was given today. And that's the way we're supposed to envision the Torah, as if it was given today. And until the ultimate level of newness in the Torah, until the new Torah of Mashiach's times, that we say, that when Mashiach comes, it says, Torah Chadasha Biti Teitzei, a new Torah will come out from me. Even those that study the entire Torah, it's like many Mamarim, he brings down the idea, even the Avos and Moshe Rabbeinu that learned the entire Torah and have been sitting in Gan Eden for thousands of years and still learning Torah over there. Still and all, they will come down here by Tchias HaMesim and Yilmud Mashiach Imoim, that Mashiach will learn Torah with them. So obviously, the Torah of Mashiach has things that in the Torah up till now wasn't there. And this is all as a result of all of our Torah learning now, that we are now increasing the divine energy and light in Torah. So that is the idea of Oiver al Pikudim, that the Yidden will pass over, go beyond the commands of the Torah. We will bring down a greater divine light into Torah than Torah has on its own. Then it continues in line 10. Is additional to this, the idea that he crosses over the count and the deficiency in the positive, Lamailam, because the higher than the commands of the Torah. It also influences someone that finds himself in the lowest most state, that he transgresses the commands of the Torah, that becomes the repair and the atonement. So there's the idea of because a Yid can reach so high above the mitzvahs of the Torah, he can influence that even someone that actually transgresses on the Torah in the lower meaning of Oiver al Pikudim, that he repairs that and becomes a kapara, kaifer, nafshi, etc. He says in line 15, in a similar vein, we can say, Gam lefi apirish Oiver al Pikudim koyal inyan aminyan, also according to the explanation, that passing by on the numbers, on the count, is referring to the numbers. That's a simple meaning of the pasuk. The Chazal said, Moshe niskashe be'inyan ashkolim. It says that Moshe Rabbeinu had difficulty to understand the idea of the machzis hashekel. And the Chazal say there were three things that he had difficulty with. He had difficulty with the idea of the new moon when Hashem told him in Parshas Boy to the mitzvah of Kiddush HaChodesh, and the same thing when it came to making of the menorah, that he was also puzzled by it and didn't understand how. And all these three things, the Machzah Shekel, the new moon, the menorah, Hashem showed him. Mevur Baramaz, and it's brought down in the Kabbalah Sefer known as Rav Moshe Zakuto, Spiritual on the Zohar, the Masha Niskasha Moshe, whom the reason why Moshe had difficulty is loy mitzad hachisarn shebeinyan hamisbar. It's not because of the lack and deficiency concerning numbers that he saw that there's something that we can't really figure out over here with the numbers. Ella, rather, what was the difficulty that Moshe Rabbeinu had? Because Yidden's root is beyond number and calculation. And that was the problem that Moshe Rabbeinu was having over here. How can they be something subjugated to a number and a count? In other words, the Jewish people are something beyond limitation, beyond time, beyond the world. And here you're going to try to box the Jewish people in to a number and to a count. You're placing them into a limited idea. According to this, we can explain that this is also the meaning of whoever crosses over the count. That the Jewish people are beyond the entire idea of numbers and counting.